So, there's been a video going around in the Honkai Star Rail community, started by Tectone, and then EO made a tweet about it, and it's kind of been getting passed around a lot. Here, let me actually give it a like real quick. And basically, it's about the state of Honkai Star Rail, and it's like the power creep slash difficulty slash the way like endgame content's going right now, and Tectone's take on it. And there's things I agree with it and things I disagree with it. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to just talk about it, make a video on it. So let's let him talk. I'll be quiet. I know I always like whenever I react to stuff, I always pause and talk over it. I'll let him get everything out and then we'll talk about it after.
But on a real note, HSR is becoming what we all knew it was going to become, which is have this character or you lose. And it kind of sucks. It's a shame, but it really is getting to that issue where have this character for this game mode or you lose. Or you don't get max rewards. Right? It's pretty irritating. Happens if you release 2 characters every patch. Is what it is. If you disagree, I would love to know why. I would but on a real
Okay. So that was the clip that's been going around. And I like half agree on it. I think it's definitely worth talking about. I do agree that the game wants you to have something for doing endgame content. And it's definitely gonna gear it towards the character that came out. Now, do I think it's have the character that just came out or you can't do this game mode? No. I think it's more have this archetype or you're gonna struggle in the game mode. So like, for example, I think this really started to show with Pure Fiction. Before Pure Fiction came out, really destruction was like king. Every boss fight in MOC was like it was either single target or it was like cleave. So destruction always did really well. You had Dan Heng, you had Jing Liu. Celia was still in like a pretty decent spot. Kafka didn't have Black Swan yet when before Pure Fiction, so she was decent, but she wasn't as good as she is now. And then Pure Fiction came out, and that really changed things. It really started, like... First, people realized, like, wait, Himiko and Herta are really good for this. Like, the follow-up attack, AoE, was really big for it. And that's when the archetypes really started the first show. And then, right now... I think why Tectone is saying this, and, like, the whole Firefly thing, and a lot of people saying, like, a lot of the content right now is very hard without Firefly is because a lot of the content is built around the break archetype right now, right? And then on top of that, I think the other thing that's making it difficult right now is that there hasn't really been any good fire characters that came out. The only fire characters that have come out so far that weren't like day 1 release characters was Topaz. And Topaz isn't even really a main DPS. She's like a sub DPS, like single target follow-up enabler. That can be a main DPS if you want to make her that way, but her best role you really don't run her that way. So your really only replacement for Firefly right now, who's an AoE fire damage dealer, is Himiko, who's in Hook. So you have a 1.0 4-star DPS and a 1.0 5-star DPS. And Himiko, even at 1.0, was already like being power crept. By 1.0, she already was kind of regarded as one of the worst DPS for a 5-star. So, of course, right now, it's gonna feel like you really need Firefly. More so than other characters have in the past, because there isn't really a good alternative to her right now. And honestly, I think it's fine. I really do think it's fine. I don't think this will be a common occurrence. I think it will be a common occurrence if... Because one of the things that was going around at the start of the game, right? Let's pull up the characters real quick. We'll pull up the data bank, go to characters. One of the common things that was going around at the start of the game that people kept saying is that you're going to want, like, to match the typing, right? You're going to want one of every DPS typing. So if you did that, if you took that advice to heart and you got one of every type, then you would have pulled Sealy in 1.0 for your quantum DPS. You would have pulled Jing Yuan in 1.0. And then in 1.1, you would have skipped because there was no DPS. 1.2, you would have skipped Kafka because you already had a lightning. And then you would have pulled... Where is he? I don't have him. Blade. And then 1.3, you would have pulled... I don't have him either. You would have had Dill. 1.4, you would have gotten Topaz. And... Where is she? Jing Liu. 1.5, you would have gotten Argenti. And if you did that, you would now have one 5-star limited DPS of every type. Which, back at the start of the game, that's what people thought was, like, the most important thing. Having a DPS of every type, that's pretty solid. But if we go through that list of characters that we just listed off, one of the big issues is they're all almost the same archetype. Sealy is like a hyper carry. Jing Liu, hyper carry. Dill, hyper carry. Blade, hyper carry. Jing Yuan, hyper carry. Like, they're all very, like, generic DPS. They all kind of fill the hyper carry comp. Some of them have a little more nuance to them, like Blade has the follow-up. Jing Yuan has the follow-up. But overall, most of them are pretty similar. They don't really fill... Until Topaz. Topaz was the only one that really kind of fills a different role. Or if you decide to get Kafka instead of Jing Yuan, then she fills a different role. So, I think part of the issue is that a lot of people kind of just saw, like, oh, DPS with big damage must be good. And they didn't think to build up all the archetypes. So it's like, maybe you don't have Kafka. And if you don't have Kafka, you really can't run dot DPS. Like, I know people say, like, oh, you need Ruan Mei for, like, the dot team. You really need Kafka for the dot team, even more than Ruan Mei. Or, like, if you want follow-up single target, you're gonna want Topaz. Like, Ratio really, really wants Topaz. And then now for break team, if you didn't get Ruan Mei, like, Firefly and Boot Hill are really not gonna be up to, like, where they could be. So I think it's one of those things of, like, now that people know, it will be less of an issue in the future. So I think right now, a lot of people are going to be struggling because if you don't have Ruan Mei and you didn't get Firefly, I'm going to be honest, you are kind of screwed. Content's definitely going to be a lot harder. But if there's one thing we have been seeing is that they're starting to really flesh out the, like, the different archetypes. It's like, for one example, is Nihility. So, like, right now for Nihility, it's pretty set in stone, the teams you're gonna run. Like, if you're running dot team, you're gonna do Kafka, Black Swan. I don't have her, but then you'd run Huefla, and you run Ruan Mei. But now we're getting a new Nihility character coming up in, I forget his name. It's like the fox guy. And it says, like, in his thing that he's, like, a healer. So that's going to be cool.
Discard your worthless
but that likely means that he's going to either boost up the dot team or he's going to boost up the Acheron team. Because now Acheron will have a slot freed up. If he does do healing, then you won't need to put, like, a abundance character in. Meaning you can free up a slot to put in, like, a Ruan Mei or, like, a Sparkle or a Bronya on the team. And still have the double Nihility. Or if you have E2, then you could put Ruan Mei and like Sparkle, or Bronya and Sparkle, or like one of the combinations of that, and then still have a spot free for the one Nihility, because you'll have the healer, the healing Nihility guy. So you're gonna start fleshing it out, and I think it's gonna be one of those things of like, it becomes more of an issue before it starts to become less of an issue. As the game goes on more and more, you have more characters, you'll flesh out more of the archetypes, and there's only so many of them they can make. It's a turn-based game. You can only get so creative with it and so many archetypes before it kind of just, you just run out. So I think this is probably going to be one of the last big ones with Break. Maybe in the future we'll see more characters like Adventurine who scale off of like defense, or Blade who scale off like HP, but it isn't like a different playstyle. They just scale differently. So I really don't think it will be as big of an issue in the future. And if we're being honest, this is pretty normal. I think it was Mr. Pokey that said it, and I do agree with this take of, you kind of get two options, right? To make someone pull for the characters, they either do stuff like this, where they gear the current endgame content to favor the characters that just came out. Like, it just makes sense from a business standpoint. Almost every gacha game does it. For example, like 1.6 in Genshin, if anyone remembers that, they buffed Swirl, and then they released Kazuha. And then on top of that, they made the buff for Anemo insane in 1.6. I remember I didn't pull Kazuha, but I used Anemo Lumine. And like, up until then, people said she was like one of the worst characters. And you'd use that character and you just swirl anything, and the swirl was buffed so much because Kazuha was out and they wanted people to pull for him, that you just swirl and everything would blow up. And the thing is, like, in the future, as we start getting more and more characters that fill similar roles and similar niches, it'll be less of an issue of like, you need this character, and it'll just be more of, have one of these characters that fill this niche. And I think we're already starting to see that with follow-up. Like, you could run Ruan Mei with the follow-up team, but you could also, now we have more like specific one in Robin, but if you don't have her, you could run Ruan Mei. You have Himiko, you have Herda, you have Dr. Ratio, you have Topaz, you have Jing Yuan, you have Blade. Like, we have a lot of options for the follow-up team. It's no longer like you need Himiko and Herda. There are other options that you can run. And they're just gonna keep adding more. And it seems like that's the same for Dot. Like, right now, Dot's like pretty set in stone, but now we're getting a new Nihility character, so we'll see how that changes things. And Break Effect is just the newest one, which is why it's starting to feel that way. But over time, I do think it'll change, and it won't be as much as an issue anymore. But again, I think it's also being like more of an issue because of the alternatives to Firefly are just so limited and not the best alternatives right now. Because Firefly is an AoE fire DPS. The only AoE fire DPS we have is Himiko, who's 1.0 and has never been good. And then Quinifin, who's not even a main DPS, she's really just more of like a dot support. And then Gallagher was freaking abundant. And Hook was a 1.0 4-star. So it kind of makes sense right now that he would feel this way. And I don't blame him for feeling that way. Like, it makes sense why he would say that. But I don't think it's cause for concern yet for the future of Star Rail. I think personally it will get better. I think it might get worse temporarily before getting better. As of right now, it does make sense why he's saying it. But I really think it's more archetype than you need this specific character. So the other thing that it's gonna largely hinge on and really like change the meta, I guess, is harmony characters. And I think that's also part of the issue right now, and why I think it'll be solved more in the future. Because we're already starting to see it kind of get solved. So, when the game first came out, Bronya was like universally known as the best character in the game. And she really enabled the hyper carry DPS, which is why for so long, that was really the only meta we saw. Like, Sealy was hyper carry. And then, like, the next meta character to come out after that was, like, Blade. Blade was, like, a close second, or as good. And then he was hyper carry. And then after that, we saw Dill, again, another hyper carry character. And then Jingliu, another hyper carry character. It wasn't until Ruan Mei came out in 1.6 that we really started to see the emergence of other like styles of play. When like Dot really started to come together, when Follow-Up finally started to have a Harmony character that could support the team. Because the issue with Bronya is Bronya has like a decent ult, right? She ults, she gives the entire team crit damage. But the part that really makes Bronya special was that she had a buff for a single character that would give them 100% action forward. They get a whole extra turn, they get a cleanse, they get a big damage buff, and then you kind of just like, you have the ults as like the cherry on top. Ruan Mei was finally the first character to enable another playstyle where instead of getting that one big buff for one turn, you now get a slightly smaller buff for multiple turns and on multiple characters. And then that has put her in huge demand ever since. Basically, every team wants Ruan Mei. Like, no team is like worse with Ruan Mei. And then we've seen that start to be solved a little. Like, she's still very much in demand for many teams. Because Dot team still really wants her. The new Break team with Firefly really wants her. And then even a lot of hyper carry teams, like, she's still good in. But the thing is, we're already starting to see her start to get a little bit smaller of a role with Robin coming in. Because now we finally have another good Harmony support that can buff the entire team. And she kind of takes the role of the follow-up attack buffer. So over time, I think we'll start to see more of this, where it's like this one character where it's like, oh, you really need this character to like beat the content, won't be as big because the roles that characters will have will start to be smaller and smaller because other characters will start to fill out that role. Like, we've already seen it with Bronya, and now we have Sparkle. Like, Sparkle has kind of stepped in and filled in a lot of the role that Bronya has. And while it's not as big of a like a change as Sparkle was for like Bronya, Robin does still come in and take some of the role of Ruan Mei. Now the issue I think comes in is that for new players, and now this isn't a Star Rail specific thing, this is basically every gacha. But for new players, I think it's going to be more of an issue of you're going to have to pull the banner character. Because for a long-time player, you'll probably have characters that could fill these niches. But if you're a new player, chances are you're probably not going to have, you know, a ready-to-go Topaz ratio for like a follow-up single target, or a Kafka Black Swan for like a Dot team or something. And then at that point, you're going to be more forced into pulling for the banner unit. And I think that's where the struggle's really going to come in, is for the new players. But for the people that have been playing for a while, that have been pulling for multiple units, that fill multiple roles, I think it'll be fine and it'll get easier for you with time. And you'll be able to pull these more niche characters that fill a very specific role. And then the other option you have is investment. So for a character like Akron, who is insane DPS, is just an insane unit overall, and has a lot of room to grow, you could just start investing into this character heavily. And at that point, you could kind of muscle your way through the content. I feel like another team that could do that is the Dot team. Dot team might not always clear content the fastest. It might not always get you like the 0 cycles. But if you have like a S1, E1 Kafka, you have like an S1, E1 Black Swan, and you have like an E1 Ruame, like you could really start to just muscle your way through content, even if you don't fit the archetype. So I feel like there are multiple options. Like if you really like a character, you really like a playstyle, and you really like a team, you could kind of just take that character and go in like all in on some of them, and it'll still work out. Like Acheron still has a lot of room to grow as well, and so does the Dot team. I think that's another thing, is you have to be smart about who you do this with. Like I don't think you do this with every character. Character like Jingliu has kind of hit her cap already. Like Jingliu came out and she already had her support. She's just a typical, like very simple hyper carry support, and she already had options with like Tingyun. Huefua came out shortly after her, and that helped. And then she had Bronya. But then a character like Acheron has so much room to grow, because right now it's like it's kind of awkward, because it's like you have Silverwolf who could put up some debuffs and be like one of the agility people, but Acheron does AoE. So then it's like Silverwolf is single target, so it's not as, it doesn't work great, I guess is the best way to put it. And then Pella, yeah, she puts like the AoE shred, but she's like a 4-star 1.0 character. I'm sure in the future we will see a better version of Pella or something like that. Like the room for Acheron to grow is a lot larger. So investing heavily into a character like this, yeah, I don't mean this heavily. Maybe like E2. But if you invested into an Acheron and had like an E2 S1 like Acheron, I think you'll be fine for a lot of content. For as long as you start pulling the characters around her, that'll make her better. Because she has a lot of room to grow, and she's already insane. So, yes, you're going to have to be smart with your pulls. But as you get more and more characters, I think it'll be fine. And if you really want to, you can figure out how to muscle through it with the characters you really like, if you just pull smartly. Anyways, let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.